The gate is iron, and it is already closing. You are 7 years old, and the last thing you hear from the outside world is your mother's footsteps walking away without looking back. Somewhere behind that gate, a bell begins to ring. It will ring like this, dividing your days into pieces for the rest of your life. 7 years old. Read that again. In the High Middle Ages, roughly the year 1250, in the patchwork of small kingdoms and prince-bishoprics that made up medieval Europe, it was entirely legal, entirely common, for a family to hand a daughter over to a convent before she had lost all her milk teeth. Some entered even younger. This was not a rare tragedy. It was a system, and you were born directly into its gears. Here is the twist that makes it worse. This was not a decision made in a moment of desperation. It was planned before you could walk. Noble families often earmarked a daughter for the church at birth, the same way they earmarked land for a firstborn son. Baptismal records from the period sometimes note it outright, a girl destined, from her very first days, for a life she would have no say in choosing. You were not sent away because something went wrong. You were sent away because everything had gone exactly according to plan, just not yours. Now the reward, because there is one, and it matters. Inside these walls, you will receive something almost no woman outside them ever will. You will learn to read. Think about what that meant in 1250. Most noble women outside convent walls never learned more than managing a household. You inside will be taught Latin, scripture, arithmetic, music. In the scriptorium, older nuns will teach you to grind pigment from crushed insects and lapis lazuli, to letter a manuscript page so precisely that 800 years later, someone will still be able to read your handwriting. You will have access to a library. You will have autonomy over your own work in a way your married sisters, bound to a husband's household, never will. For some girls, genuinely, this was not a cage. It was the only classroom medieval Europe ever offered a woman. Your days take on a shape you did not choose but slowly learn by heart. Matins in the black cold before dawn. Then lauds, prime, terce, sext, nun, vespers, compline, 8 prayers threaded through every waking hour, an unbroken wheel that turns whether you are exhausted, sick, or grieving. Between them there is work that never stops, scrubbing stone floors until your knuckles crack in the cold, boiling the thin barley pottage that will be, some winters, nearly all there is to eat. Fasting is not occasional here, it is doctrine, and surviving convent records describe novices growing faint during Lent, some so weakened by the required fasts that infirmary logs list them among the sick. Here is a reveal worth sitting with. Piety in this world was measured partly in how much hunger a body could absorb without complaint. But do not let that reward soften what came before it. Consent on paper was required. Canon law technically demanded a novice agree to her vows, freely and without coercion. In practice, a 7-year-old handed over by her own father had never been taught any other option existed. You cannot meaningfully refuse a life you were never shown an alternative to. Every abbess who accepted a child that young knew exactly what kind of consent she was really receiving. Here is your first dark reveal. Leaving once you took final vows was almost impossible. Under both canon and civil law, a nun who abandoned her order without formal release was classified as an apostate, a fugitive from her own vows, who could be legally hunted, captured, and returned to her convent by force. The gate that closed behind you at 7 was not symbolic. For most girls who passed through it, it was permanent, enforced by the same legal system that governed kings. And yet hope again, because the story is not only darkness. Between the prayers there is a rhythm to convent life that some women, by every surviving account, found genuinely fulfilling. Communities of women running their own infirmaries, their own farmland, their own finances, answerable to an abbess rather than a husband. No forced childbirth in an age when roughly 1 in 5 mothers died from complications of pregnancy. A companionship of equals in a world that offered women almost none. Some nuns wrote treatises on medicine, composed music still performed today, corresponded with kings as trusted advisers. This life, chosen or not, became for some women the most powerful and educated existence medieval Europe would allow them. Here is one more reveal to sit with before the story turns dark again. Some of the most powerful women in medieval Europe were abbesses, not queens. An abbess of a wealthy convent could control vast farmland, command tenant villages, mint her own currency in a handful of cases, and sit in judgment over disputes that would otherwise go to a bishop's court. It was, strange as it sounds, one of the only executive positions medieval Europe allowed a woman to hold in her own name. For a girl clever and patient enough to rise, the convent was not only a cage, it was also, improbably, one of the very few ladders. But then the twist again. Not every convent was this kind of place. Here is your second dark reveal. Some convents, particularly those attached to powerful noble or royal families, functioned less like communities of faith and more like political prisons. A troublesome royal daughter, a widow whose inheritance threatened a rival heir, a woman who simply knew too much, all could be quietly deposited behind convent walls with no crime committed and no trial held, disappeared from political life as effectively as if she had been executed, only slower, and with better documentation for the family's reputation. You are 13 now and you learn this lesson personally. There is a girl your age, Agnes, placed here the same year you were, for the same unspoken arithmetic. One morning her straw pallet is empty. 2 days later she is brought back through the gate between two of her own male relatives, her face swollen from crying, or from something worse, you are never told which. She does not speak again for a year. When she finally does, it is only to say that running was the last mistake she plans to make. Here is your third dark reveal, and it is the quietest, cruelest one. Many of these girls never saw their families again, not because visits were formally forbidden, some convents allowed them, but because families who had already paid their single, cheaper convent dowry rarely returned. A marriage dowry might have cost your father a fortune in land and coin. Your convent dowry cost a fraction of that. Historians studying medieval account books have found the pattern again and again. It was often simply cheaper to give a daughter to God than to give her to a husband. The visits stopped, quietly, the way debts stopped being mentioned once they're paid in full. You are 16 now. Final vows are weeks away and something in you has gone very still. You watch the older nuns, some radiant with a devotion that looks nothing like performance, some hollowed out in a way no prayer schedule can fix, and you understand for the first time that both futures are still open to you. The convent did not decide in advance which woman you would become. It only decided that you would become her here inside these walls, whether you wanted to or not. Then something almost like grace arrives. You are given charge of the infirmary. A nun a generation before your time, Hildegard of Bingen, wrote entire treatises on medicine and natural science from behind convent walls just like these, corresponding with popes and emperors as an equal proof that even a life you never chose could still hold room for a mind entirely your own. But do not mistake this for the ending you were hoping for. Even the most gifted, most respected nuns remained legally and permanently under the authority of an abbess who answered to a bishop, who answered to men who would never once ask what any of you actually wanted. Your intelligence bought you purpose. It did not buy you a door back out. You are 40 now. The bell that once felt like a countdown to your entire life ending has become, strangely, the only rhythm you know how to live inside. Younger girls arrive the way you once did, crying, silent, sometimes both, and you catch yourself, to your own quiet horror, speaking your mother's old words to a new 7-year-old without meaning to. You hate that you know exactly how to say it convincingly. Historians still debate how many of the thousands of women who entered high medieval convents were called there by faith, and how many were placed there by family arithmetic they never got to see. The vow, once spoken, looked identical on the page whether it came from devotion or despair, and that perhaps is the most quietly devastating fact of all. A convent register from this period rarely distinguishes the two. Beside your name, if it was recorded at all, there would be no note explaining whether you knelt at that altar willingly, or because you had never once been offered a door marked otherwise. You think sometimes about the version of yourself who might have existed on the other side of the gate, married at 14 or 15 the way your sisters were, to a man chosen by the same cold arithmetic that chose this life for you. You will never know if she would have been Hapaka, or if she would simply have traded one set of walls for another invisible ones. You only know the woman you actually became. Steady, capable, quietly fierce in ways the 7-year-old at the gate could never have imagined. Faith found you eventually, somewhere in the decades of ringing bells, not the faith your father paid for, but one you built yourself prayer by prayer, in a life you did not choose but slowly, stubbornly made your own. What survives 8 centuries later is rarely a name. Convent records list novices by title and family, rarely by the interior life no one thought to ask about. What survives is the manuscript pages some of you illuminated in gold leaf and crushed lapis, the medical treatises some of you wrote in the quiet hours between prayers, the small, stubborn proof that even behind a gate that was never meant to open again, something in you kept reaching for a life of your own making. History remembers the cathedrals these walls helped build. It rarely remembers the 7-year-old girls who built quiet, unrecorded lives inside them, one ringing bell at a time.